They called it the Jericho Trumpet, and for many soldiers, it was the last sound they ever heard. During the early years of World War II, one weapon carved its name into history not through sheer firepower alone, but through fear itself. The Junkers Ju-87, better known as the Stuka dive bomber, became infamous for the wailing scream of its sirens as it plunged from the sky. It wasn't just an attack, it was psychological warfare made mechanical. German engineers had attached special sirens to the fixed landing gear, designed to howl as the aircraft dived at speeds over 350 miles per hour. To those on the ground, it sounded like the world was splitting open. Soldiers froze, civilians ran. Some accounts speak of men dropping their weapons, unable to fight against a terror they couldn't see until it was too late. But here lies the darker truth. That iconic sound wasn't simply a scare tactic. It carried hidden consequences for the enemy, for the victims, and even for the pilots who flew with it. The Stuka was both feared and fatally flawed, a weapon whose legend overshadowed the grim realities behind its design. To understand why this screaming demon became a symbol of Nazi terror, we must strip away the myths and dive straight into the chaos it unleashed. Because the truth behind the Stuka siren is far more haunting than the sound itself. The year was 1939. Europe stood on the edge of collapse. Hitler's armies had unleashed Blitzkrieg, lightning war, a new kind of assault that struck faster than nations could react. At the center of this storm, the Stuka became the spearhead of German conquest. Picture the map: flat farmlands of Poland, stretching endlessly beneath cold September skies. Roads turned to rivers of refugees, carts and bicycles, jammed together, while above them, the Luftwaffe hunted, unchallenged. To the west, France and Britain waited anxiously behind their defenses. To the east, the Soviet Union prepared to seize its own slice of land. And in between, Poland became the battlefield that would decide whether Blitzkrieg was unstoppable or just another gamble. For the Germans, victory here meant proof that their new tactics, tanks punching forward, infantry rushing behind, and dive bombers raining terror from above, could rewrite the art of war itself. The Stuka was their chosen messenger of fear, designed not just to destroy, but to shatter the enemy's will before battle even began. For Poland, it was a fight for survival. Soldiers armed with rifles and outdated anti-aircraft guns faced machines designed for a new century of killing. Every village, every bridge, every trench carried the weight of a nation's last stand. What hung in the balance was more than territory. It was the world's first real glimpse of mechanized terror, a weapon that made men cower before the fight had even started. And as the Stuka screamed across Europe, the question was no longer whether Germany would win the skies, but how long anyone could endure the sound of their descent. At the heart of the Luftwaffe's early war strategy stood one man, General Wolfram von Richthofen, cousin of the famed Red Baron. Coldly efficient, he believed in war as a science: precise, calculated, devastating. Under his command, the Stuka squadrons were honed into a weapon unlike anything Europe had yet faced. The pilots themselves were no ordinary men. Many had trained in secret during the 1932nd, flying from hidden airfields in Spain during the Civil War, perfecting the terrifying art of the dive. They learned to point their aircraft nose first at the earth, enduring forces that pressed their bodies into their seats, and to release their bombs with pinpoint accuracy before pulling out at the last second. To outsiders, it seemed suicidal. To the Germans, it was the future of war. On the ground, Polish commanders had placed faith in fortifications and the courage of their troops. They had prepared trenches, scattered anti-aircraft batteries, and mobilized horse-drawn artillery brave, but outdated against what was coming. Their intelligence had warned of German buildup, but the sheer speed and coordination of Blitzkrieg was underestimated. Few could imagine that whole cities might fall in days, not weeks. The German side, meanwhile, worked with ruthless efficiency. Fuel and munitions were stockpiled at forward bases. Maps were studied down to individual bridges and crossroads. Radio operators rehearsed signals to coordinate the exact second when Stukas would dive to clear the way for advancing panzers. Nothing was left to chance, except one chilling factor. No one could predict the psychological effect of those screaming sirens. In the hours before the assault, a strange quiet fell across the Polish countryside. Soldiers smoked nervously in trenches, clutching rifles that felt too small against the shadow of modern machines. Farmers hurried livestock into barns, praying the storm would pass them by. The morning sky was deceptively calm, pale blue, streaked with thin clouds, the kind of day that might have promised peace in another world. But on the German airfields just across the border, mechanics tightened bolts, checked fuel lines, and armed bombs under the wings of Stukas lined up like predators waiting for release. Pilots strapped themselves into cockpits, gloved hands tightening over controls, waiting for the order that will unleash chaos. When it came, it was not shouted, but spoken quietly over radios, crisp and final: start engines. Moments later, the stillness of dawn shattered as propellers roared to life, and the first black crosses lifted into the sky. The war was no longer looming. It had begun. The first German formations crossed into Poland at dawn, the 1st of September, 1939. On the ground, panzers thundered forward in columns, grinding down dusty roads lined with trees still heavy in late summer leaf. Above them, the sky was alive with dark specks that grew larger with each passing second, Stukas. Their wings caught the morning light as they circled, waiting for their signal to strike. At first, resistance was scattered but fierce. Polish troops fired from hedgerows and woodland ridges, surprising advancing German patrols. Horse-mounted cavalry darted from forest in daring counterattacks, slashing at supply lines before fading back into the hills. In villages, civilians armed with hunting rifles and Molotov cocktails joined soldiers in desperate ambushes, forcing German infantry to fight for ground that was supposed to fall in hours. But nature itself posed difficulties. Poland's roads were narrow and often turned to mud after rain, slowing armored advances. Bridges vital to German movement were blown apart by retreating defenders, forcing engineers to work under fire to repair them. Stuka pilots, though trained to perfection, found that sudden clouds could obscure targets, forcing dives into half-blind chaos where a single miscalculation meant death. For brief moments, it seemed the tide might be held. Outside the town of Piotr Kov, a hidden Polish artillery battery caught a German armored column in a choke point and unleashed a devastating volley, shattering tanks and sending infantry scrambling. The defenders cheered as black smoke curled into the sky, proof that Blitzkrieg was not invincible. Word of such victory spread quickly, lifting spirits among weary soldiers. Yet each spark of hope was swiftly met with ruthless reply. Stukas roared overhead, sirens howling as they plunged directly onto gun positions. Explosions ripped open earth and flesh alike. Survivors stumbled back, deafened and broken, as German armor resumed its advance. The rhythm became familiar. Resistance, a flash of triumph, then obliteration from the sky. Still, the Poles refused to collapse. They fought in forests, in fields, in streets littered with rubble. Every ambush slowed the German timetable. Every counterstrike proved their courage. But the weight pressing against them was immense and growing heavier by the hour. By the end of that first week, whole towns lay in ruins. Columns of refugees streamed down the same roads as the retreating soldiers, blurring the line between civilian and combatant. For many, there was no safe place left to run. And as the Luftwaffe tightened its grip, the haunting cry of the Stuka siren grew more constant, more inescapable. What had begun as sudden terror was becoming a daily reality. The ground was set. The defenses were breaking. The stage was ready for the full fury of the storm, and the real horror had not yet even begun. The sirens came first, a rising wail that clawed at the nerves, echoing across fields and towns like the scream of some mechanical beast. Men froze where they stood. Civilians clutched children, their eyes searching the empty sky. And then the Stukas fell from thousands of feet above. The dive bombers plunged almost vertically. Engines howled. Sirens shrieked. Bomb bay doors opened. Impact. Explosions tore through earth and stone, hurling dirt and bodies alike into the air. Trenches collapsed on screaming men. Horses bolted, eyes wide with terror. The ground shook with each detonation, until it seemed the earth itself was breaking apart. Polish anti-aircraft gunners fought back desperately. Old 40mm Bofors guns spat fire at the descending shapes, tracers streaking upward. A lucky shot clipped a Stuka's wing. The bomber spun downward in flames, crashing into a grove of trees with a deafening roar. For a heartbeat, the soldiers cheered, but there were too many. For every Stuka that fell, dozens more dived with surgical precision. Bridges vanished in plumes of smoke. Rail yards erupted in fireballs, scattering twisted steel like toys. Villages became infernos within minutes, their wooden houses collapsing in walls of flame. On the ground, German tanks pressed forward behind the destruction. Panzer IIs and Divvies rolled over shattered defenses. their 37mm and 75mm guns blasting apart bunkers at point-blank range. Infantry followed, submachine guns chattering, grenades hissing through the smoke. The Poles resisted with everything left. Cavalry charges cut into exposed German flanks, sabers flashing in desperate defiance. In Warsaw, machine guns rattled from rooftops as civilians joined soldiers to hold barricades. At times, it seemed sheer determination alone might hold the line, but the sky would not relent. Each counterattack was answered by the same chilling chorus, the sirens rising, the shadows growing larger, the explosions returning. The battlefield became a rhythm of terror. Dive, scream, detonate, advance again and again. Amid the chaos, bravery burned bright. A Polish platoon near Wisna held off an entire armored division for days, their bunkers pounded into rubble, their weapons dwindling to a handful of rifles and pistols. Still they fought, forcing the Germans to pay for every inch of ground. When the end came, it was with silence, the defenders dead to the last man. Even the Germans, for all their momentum, bore scars. Pilots endured brutal G-forces in every dive, blacking out, waking only seconds before impact. Bombardiers watched as flag-shredded comrades midair. Tank crews advanced through firestorms, engines choking on dust and smoke, men coughing blood from fumes that seeped into their lungs. War spared no one. By mid-September 1939, Poland's defenses were shattered, its armies scattered, its cities reduced to rubble. The Stuka siren, once a shocking novelty, had become the sound of annihilation. Nearly 70,000 Polish soldiers lay dead, with countless civilians buried in the ruins of towns and villages. Equipment that once promised resistance lay twisted and silent on the fields. The Germans paid losses of their own hundreds of aircraft, including Stukas, and tanks burned out in ambushes, but the price was small compared to what they gained. Blitzkrieg had worked. On the 17th of September, the Soviet Union struck from the east. With enemies closing in from both directions, Poland's fate was sealed. Its government fled. Its soldiers were killed, captured, or driven into exile. The campaign ended in weeks, not months, proving that terror from the sky could break a nation as surely as bullets and shells. The Ju-87 Stuka entered history not for its speed or power, but for its voice. That siren-engineered fear became the world's first great symbol of psychological warfare. In the years that followed, the Stuka's weaknesses were exposed, hunted down by faster fighters. Yet its scream never vanished from memory. Survivors swore that even decades later, a recording of it could freeze their blood. It was more than sound. It was a symbol of how war reaches beyond the body into the mind. And long after the last siren faded, its echo still lingers.